They may be a child selling flowers on the side of a rundown street, or even a scruffy-looking man stood by a market stall flogging fake branded t-shirts. It doesn't matter in what situation you are in. Do not, under any circumstances, give them the time. Make an excuse, run, or just say nothing. My name is Tom, and I came face to face with one of them 4 years ago. Me and Scott were out in town on our way to the sports bar to watch the game. As we rounded the corner onto our destined street, Cherry Road, we were suddenly approached by a frail man. He had smoky gray thinning hair and a rugged, world-weary face. His shabby, brown, moth-eaten suit jacket hung upon his tired body as he tightly clutched a case full of jewelry. "Anything take your fancy, kind sirs," he said, brandishing yellow-stained, uneven teeth. "No thank you," I swiftly replied as I raised my hand up towards him. "Are you sure? Not even a lovely pair of diamond earrings for a special lady?" he quickly contended while moving into our path. We said we were fine. "Please move out of our way," Scott sneered back at him as he swerved his body around the gaunt-looking pest. "Can you at least tell me the time?" the man called out as we continued along our path. Scott glanced at his phone, turned, and shouted back, 12:15. We both then crossed the road and headed towards the illuminated sign of the bar. Though it appeared strange in this day and age that someone would ask the time, seeing the amount of technology we have around us. We both grew up in an era of wrist watches and wall clocks, so we weren't unfamiliar with this question. As harmless as that man's query was, the following days were not. After the game had finished in our favor, we proceeded to keep the beers flowing in celebration well into that evening. I am still not sure how I got home that night, but I certainly remember how I was awoke the next morning. My phone vibrated frantically on my cabinet as my generic ringtone charmed me from my slumber. I groggily woke up and answered, my voice husky and irregular. "Hello, Tom, are you up?" "Scott, is that you?" I said, still trying to adjust my eyes. "Yes. Something weird happened to me last night, man," he replied, seemingly full of energy. "Do you even remember last night?" I responded while chuckling. "Tom, no. Listen, you know that old annoying man, the guy trying to sell us jewelry yesterday?" He came back in a calm but serious tone. "Yeah, he was weird. What about him?" I quizzically asked. "I saw him down my road as I was walking home last night. I had turned onto my street, and he was there, just standing at the bus stop," Scott said, now talking in a faster and more eccentric manner. "That's pretty strange, dude, but probably just a coincidence. He was at a bus stop after all," I responded, trying to bring a rational conclusion to the situation. "Yeah, that's what I thought at first, but all of the buses in our area had stopped by the time we left at 10:45. Scott eagerly came back, challenging my hypothesis. "I think you are reading too much into this, bro. It's not like he was at your door or anything," I jokingly said, trying to ease Scott's concerns. "Plus, you were drinking quite a lot if I remember correctly," I continued. "You're probably right. It just unnerved me a bit, that's all," he replied, now seeming to accept the situation for what it was. We both had plans that day. He was out with his girlfriend Danielle, and I had to go to my parents for dinner with my wife Samantha. I didn't get much time during weekdays to socialize, as I worked long hours for an insurance company. This meant I didn't speak to Scott again until that Thursday night. I had got home from work and was about to sit down to eat with Samantha when my phone rang. "Hey, what's up?" I answered while my wife glared at me. "Tom, I saw him again. He was in the office block window next to mine, just staring at me." Scott frantically started blurting out at me. "Scott, chill, man. Are you sure it was him?" I asked while trying to calm him once again. "It was him. I remember that face. And that office, it's empty. It's been up for rent for like 5 months or so." I looked at Samantha, shook my head, and shrugged. I walked into my living room. He may just have another job as a decorator or something, and just so happened to be working at that office. He might have recognized you from the weekend. That might be why he was looking at you," I reassuringly explained. "Yeah, I suppose. I have been under a lot of stress at work with the whole takeover and all of the redundancies," Scott replied, his tiredness now filtering through into his voice. "I'm just about to eat, so I've got to go, man. See you this weekend." "Yeah." I finished up our conversation while Samantha peered into the room, gesturing me to come eat. "Okay, sorry bro, of course, see you this weekend." I'll be round to your place around 2, Scott said now in a more relaxed manner. No problem, man. Anytime. See you then. I hung up the phone while wandering back into my kitchen. What was that all about? Samantha said while cutting into the tender beef joint. Nothing. Just Scott keeps thinking that he's seeing some old jewelry salesman everywhere, I replied. That's weird. Has he got a stalker then? She said while letting out a small laugh. Apparently so. It's probably his wild imagination though. You know how he gets, I said back to her humorously. We continued our evening meal and settled down for the night in front of a romantic comedy. We eventually went to bed at about 11 p.m. The next morning I awoke to a few missed calls from Scott. My phone had been on silent during the night, and me being a heavy sleeper, I didn't wake. The 3 calls were made at 12:15, 12:20 and 1:14. I immediately thought that there was an emergency and called him back. The rhythmic calling tone sounded for a minute before cutting to his voicemail. I tried a few more times throughout the morning. He wasn't answering. Just before I was going to drive to his place, as I left work at 6 p.m., he called me. Scott, what's going on, man? I quickly answered. Sorry, bro, I went into work and forgot my phone. Scott replied in a dejected voice. You called me a couple of times last night. What happened? I said, now quite concerned. The guy, he was at my window last night, just staring. I called you, then the police. I didn't know what else to do. He said in between deep sighs. Damn, man, are you okay? Did they get him? I replied, feeling guilty that I hadn't believed his previous worries. Nah, the police came round and checked around my place, but didn't find anyone. I'm okay, just a bit freaked out, that's all. I'm just glad this week was done with, to be honest, he said before letting out a deep sigh. Yeah, well, let me know if anything happens tonight, and I'll come over. Is Danielle not with you? I asked. No, she's been away all week with work. I will catch up with you when I see you tomorrow, he said, while trying to tie our conversation up. Okay, man, as long as you're good, I said, not quite believing his calm demeanor. I went home half expecting another call from him. That night, he surely wasn't doing well. I even thought about going round to check on him, but I didn't want to invade his evening. I woke the next day to no missed calls. To my relief, the police must have scared the intruder off, I thought. Scott would be over later today to watch the game, and Samantha was going over to her friends for a baby shower. The time was nearing 3 p.m., and the game would be starting soon. Where was Scott? I thought while checking my phone. I called him a couple of times, growing more and more concerned every time. Each ring I was met with his infuriating voicemail. The game started, but my attention was in my own racing negative thoughts on what may have happened. Half an hour later, my open-ended questions were answered. My phone began to ring. Unknown number. Hello. Good afternoon, sir. Am I speaking with a Tom Greenfield? An official-sounding voice answered. Yes. Who am I speaking to? Sorry, I hesitantly replied, expecting it to be just another cold caller. This is Detective Harmer. There has been an incident involving a Mr. Scott Taylor. I believe you were due to meet with him today. Is that correct? What? Yes, he was planning to come round. Is he okay? I choked back, a lump now forming at the back of my throat. Unfortunately, he was involved in an incident earlier today, and we would need you to come down to the police station. We will explain everything once you get here. I agreed and hung up the phone. I started to tremble as I feared the worst. The drive over to the police department was a blur, a terrifying, sickening blur. I pulled up outside and hesitantly went up to the desk. They called the detective over from the back office. I noticed Danielle, Scott's girlfriend, was sat in the corner, her eyes red raw, with flowing tears running down her blotchy face. The detective led me into a small room with a large rectangular mirror. He went on to tell me how Scott was involved in an RTA at 12:15 today on the corner of Cherry Road and Oakwood Street. He regrettably passed away at the scene. My eyes began to fill as I buried my head into my shaking hands. I managed to compose myself after a few moments. How did it happen? I managed to ask, my voice wavering through my tears. The detective began to say that there was no explainable reason why Scott lost control of the vehicle. They were busy looking over CCTV and dash cam footage to decipher cause. I waited with Scott's parents and Danielle, each of us consoling one another just as Samantha arrived. I latched onto her as I broke down on what had become the worst day of my life. The next day we were all called back to the station as there was an update on the investigation. We sat anxiously awaiting the pending news and ultimately some answers. We were each called in one by one to that same daunting room. I sat down as Detective Harmer showed me the dash cam footage from the vehicle behind Scott's BMW. I saw Scott pass the sports bar we had been drinking in only a week before. My drifting, now upsetting memories were suddenly interrupted as I watched the small monitor. His car neared the corner just as someone slowly emerged from his back seat. They then lunged their arm around Scott's neck as the car began to swerve. The screeching tires and smoke seemed to radiate from the screen in front of me. The video then stopped before the fatal impact. "What the hell is that?" I shouted while my breathing grew deeper and more erratic. "We were hoping you could tell us," the detective replied. "We are aware that Mr. Taylor had seen a man throughout the week that he believed was following him." He continued. "Play the video again," I hastily said. I watched in horror as I focused on the person in the back seat. He had smoky gray thinning hair and was dressed in a shabby, old brown suit jacket. That's when I realized it was the man that was trying to sell us the jewelry. "It's him, the man Scott said was following him," I said while pointing at the screen. "Was he in the car as well when you found Scott?" I continued. "No, that's the thing. There was nobody else in the car with Mr. Taylor when we arrived, nor did any witnesses see any other people leave the vehicle," the detective said in a puzzled tone. I began to explain to him our brief encounter with the man, saying how we had declined the jewelry, and Scott had just given him the time after the man asked. I then paused and looked at the stop dash cam footage. The time showed 12:14. It was only then that it dawned on me. A seemingly unlocked memory came to mind. Why did the salesman ask the time when in his case sat a row of silver-plated watches? When I had no more information to give the detective, I was allowed to leave. I had a mixture of sadness, anger, and confusion pulsating through my brain. All this anguish all at once. I spent the next few days searching for any sort of logical answer to this madness. I stumbled upon a few other stories in my obsessive search as I went down the unexplained rabbit hole. Each experience I read was told how a stranger had asked the time to an unexpected victim, normally a friend or a family member. Once they had given them the time, they had unwillingly scheduled in their own death exactly a week later in the same location that they answered. It also described the torment the victim had endured leading up to their demise. Many described the people as demonic predators sent to this world to capture souls for the devil, while others spoke of interdimensional entities that fed on the chase of the hunt and eventually the kill of their prey. Many of the experiences sounded all too familiar, and yet it couldn't possibly be real. The things these people were talking about did not exist. They just couldn't exist. Whatever happened to Scott in my eyes was a tragedy, but I can say with full confidence, if a stranger asks me the time again, I will say nothing and get as far away from them as possible. I would advise you do the same.